Welcome back to episode 14 of Beat Up Exchange. I'm Adam, joined by James, and we are excited to get into some stories today.
Let's get right into it. We got some uh market talk to get started. Jay Powell, kind of some allegations being thrown around, some sort of speculation that he might be looking to resign after a little scandal with the Fed's headquarter renovation. Apparently it cost a little bit more than expected, maybe an extra 700 million is what I'm reading,
But
but not necessarily what you might think it would be. It's not Trump pushing him out right now, but it's more something like this. I don't know. It's kind of weird to me.
yeah, interesting. I think that timing is too bizarre to be a coincidence for me. I think that has to be a lot of people who are poking around looking for reasons to hate on this guy because they didn't get the rate cut that they were looking for. But that's not to totally dismiss it because this could totally be a real thing. And if like those numbers are true, that's a lot of money to be spending on an office building for government employees.
I don't know. I mean, is he the one who's in charge of the construction? Is he the one who's planning all this stuff out? Is he? I don't know how this works. I'm so confused. The timing cannot make me any more skeptical. That's all I'll say.
I agree with that. I agree with that, but we'll see where this goes. But my opinion of J Pal still, even just from looking at his articles, is that to think that he's the guy who's going to be trying to finesse money for a nicer office out of the government is it would be very surprising.
Anything but cut rates, I guess.
I guess. I guess.
But besides the fact that there hasn't been any rate cuts, market's still ripping, unemployment still looks really well. I have a little chart that I found from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, kind of just showing the employment rate seasonally adjusted, and it's looking pretty strong. We're seeing a little bit of a decline even in recent months, which people were not expecting. Some of it attributed to a lower labor force participation, but still a good sign. And of course, we have inflation numbers that look better, and the market's just been ripping, and it's had one of the craziest recoveries that we've ever seen. And our kind of question that we're bringing up today is this a little bit too premature? Is this warranted? Because a lot of the tariffs that had been put on pause are kind of coming to an inflection point, and there's going to be some changes going on in the next month or so. So we'll dive into it. But Adam, if you wanted to bring anything up, that maybe just an overview of this.
Yeah, I think the unemployment graph that we're both looking at is very interesting because it seems that things are really stable and in fact like trending down is not something that I would expect, especially with I don't kind of some of the other indicators with the consumer. I was looking at something on credit card debt and that there's a lot of delinquent credit card debt out there that maybe consumers are somewhat showing signs of stress, but that is to say that they're still spending. A lot of them still have stable sources of income. They have jobs. We've seen the market kind of broaden out too, I think, even outside, and you brought this up last episode, but outside of those core tech stocks, we've seen financial stocks start to do well, industrial stocks start to do well, which are all positive signs because I think kind of the more the market broadens out and the more capital flows into all these other different asset classes, the more you can kind of trust that it's on stable footing. So I think that these are all we're at a much better place right now than I would expect.
You would think sometimes reading the news that we would just be totally, our economy would be in just just completely cooked, but it's ripping right now. And we have this other graph that is from the Dow Jones market data, and it's showing some of the S&P 500's quickest recoveries after a decline of around 15%. So almost entering a bear market and then coming back to base level. And 2025 is leading the way for one of the quickest. Took around, what did it take? Around like 85-ish days. It looks like some other notable years were 98, 2020, 2019. So it's just, and some that I also want to bring up is kind of this new information age and the age of having more democratized information and earnings reports available at your fingertips and being able to see these important metrics and make investing decisions for yourself and being able to buy and sell from your phone. This is a crazy age, and it's kind of what's allowing the market to be able to recover in such a profound way.
Yeah, and I that was kind of my preliminary explanation too, and then I don't even know that we really have the full story yet on why we're able to recover so much quicker now, and that than we have in the past. I mean, if we've kind of seen this is like dramatically faster than a lot of the things that we've seen in the 90s. And these are also just some of the other quickest recoveries that we've seen. So we're comparing 2025 to some of the best recoveries ever. And that is kind of my explanation is that we have a lot of people who can invest. We have all these index funds now that make it a lot easier to put your money in the market. And also all this information is just released full speed. Everybody can be on CNBC. Institutional players have Bloomberg terminals to get information seconds after it comes out. And I think that that's one of the things that really enables people to be super light on their feet and just get comfortable buying in when it goes low. And I think that that also goes to the retail investor scene that we come back to a lot.
Talk about them all the time, but they really are a big piece of this market. And also just in terms of sentiment and being comfortable with buying the dip and almost dependent on buying the dip, which is something really weird that we've almost seen going on. But it's great for business, great for our economy. But kind of what I wanted to talk about was just maybe is this sort of rebound that we saw warranted? Because a lot of this was built off expectations that tariffs weren't going to be as bad as once believed, and that this was going to kind of just blow over. Everyone kind of forgets about it. But a lot of tariffs are coming back, and we're seeing some here. So European Union tariff's going to go from baseline 10% to 30%. Mexico is going to be at 30%. Canada is going to go up from 25% to 35%. And then some other interesting ones. One of them that I wanted to talk a little bit about was copper imports are going to go from 0% to 50%, which is going to be a little bit more impactful than people might think. So Adam, if you kind of want to explain what's going on there a little bit.
I can, yeah. James also attached a good graph of what's going on with copper imports on a by country basis. And why it matters too. But we kind of see at the top of the list, we have Chile, Canada, Mexico, Peru. And one of the things that I was personally expecting when I saw this and why I kind of thought it was a head scratcher is I was more expecting China to be closer to the top of this list, and that wasn't the case. And part of the reason why I find this puzzling on its face is that if I think that if there are countries that you want to be reliant on, it's ones that are A, have an inferior military to you, are kind of in a dependency relationship to you, like I think Chile is. Like they're not really a threat to us in any kind of way. But it would be great to have a great relationship as far as trading copper with them if they have a competitive advantage there. So, and these are things that are obviously going to be really important in the supply chain as far as electronics and defense. And they're going to be things that we need as a country for this digital economy. So I understand like why Trump might want to have some of those things in-house. But I would be more on board with it if it was against someone who was like a real adversary like China or who we were posturing against.
Right. Yeah. It doesn't seem like the two major importers that you mentioned, Chile and Canada, disproportionately supply us with most of our copper. 10 trillion around, sorry, 10 billion around combined between the two of them, as opposed to the next highest is Mexico with just a billion. These aren't necessarily countries that we're worried about in terms of national security in that sense. We're not worried about breaking out into some sort of war with them, whether cold or, you know, in other ways. But yeah, it is interesting because this is something that's kind of going under the radar. And as you mentioned, it copper is important for semiconductors, shipbuilding, and lithium ion batteries. And it's a very important, I don't know what you call it. Is it a mineral, an element? I don't totally know what it is, but
That sounds right to me.
whatever it is, this is something very crucial, and it's a tariff of 50% on it is going to be costly. And I was reading a New York Times article, and they were mentioning that it could take at least 10 years for us to kind of source copper domestically. So this is something that's gonna drive up costs in the short term, and it's looking like it's gonna go into effect on August 1st.
Yeah, and that is, I mean, concerning as far as the pricing of all these things on U.S. consumers, but I can understand why it would be an appeal to Trump's base too, of that, people in the Rust Belt who are, maybe had mining jobs before and got laid off, that they're going to be pleased to hopefully see some of these jobs come back as a result of U.S. copper looking cheaper relative to post-tariff copper from Chile. So we'll see if that happens. But I think as far as the country is concerned, that this is almost certainly going to be a net negative, sadly.
Yeah, and a lot of it keeps getting kind of attributed to this sort of national security thing, and just because we do talk about real estate a lot, you do, some that we have seen is that even in terms of people who are funding and building data centers, if they're from abroad, that's a real concern. And just kind of in general, this overarching topic of national security is something that's very important. And to the Trump administration, it means putting in place 50% tariffs, even if it's from Chile.
I guess so. I guess so. And these other tariffs too on the EU and Mexico and Canada, we'll probably get to a lot of that later, but I think that like a lot of those kind of fall into a similar bucket for me is kind of like how I think about it with like balancing the national security risk and what we want economically is that a lot of these don't have that big of a security risk tied to them. But anyway, moving on into our next story. We'll pivot to the US and we'll come back to another tariff story later. This was on student loans. This is something that I personally find interesting as a college student and having like a good close-up view of what's going on in student loans. And there seems to be a worsening crisis with student loan delinquencies and people not being able to pay back their loans. And this makes a lot of sense with how expensive education's gotten. But I'll kind of kick it to you of like what your initial thoughts are on this.
Yeah, so kind of taking a look at what we're seeing here in some of this data, there was a 10 percentage point increase from February to March of 2025 of percentage of federal student loan borrowers reported as 90 plus days due. So that is quite a frightening metric. At 1 month jump is pretty intense, and it's not going to be getting much better. We kind of look at Big Beautiful Bill and kind of how the two presidencies are kind of going from Biden era where there were interest subsidies and forgiveness of short-term loans under 10 years and lower discretionary income caps. Now we have Trump's bill being passed that is kind of pushing forward borrower accountability. And so there's no more interest subsidies, forgiveness only after 20 to 25 years, payment cap of 10% on discretionary income, and no uh, graduate education loan benefits, which is another. major piece of it, but kind of just the dynamic shifting from Biden sort of saying this is a structural error and we're going to kind of work with you to forgive these loans, and then Trump administration saying you took out these loans, you decided to get this education, and now it's on you for not paying it back. So that's kind of where we're at right now, but it is a major issue, especially as you mentioned, education prices are just getting absolutely insane.
Right. And it is kind of a question too, right? With the view from the Biden administration about that the fault here is just the blame, I know the blame rests on nobody, and we'll cover this, and sorry that this happened, versus Trump saying, this is your fault. And it is a tough situation because at the end of the day, the US government is already in extreme debt more than any individual student loan taker is. So we have that problem on our hands as well. And I think it's tough because I think in some respect this is a government-induced problem of that government student loan programs that are allowing a lot of people to go to these schools, which is an awesome opportunity for a lot of people. So certainly don't want to take anything away from that. But for a lot of roles, taking on this amount of student loan debt and paying interest on it for a long period of time, that's something that is going to allow these universities to kind of create some fat and create some bloat as far as their administrators, as far as the faculty that they have, what majors are going to be producing revenue and properly allocating to that. I think that there is a lot that needs to be done to get the price of education down. And I think a good step to that is kind of stop adding fuel to the fire, because I think in a large sense, the government does have a role in creating this problem.
I'm with you. Yeah. Um, Imagine being an 18-year-old kid and it's hard because you want to go to these schools and you want to go to the private university and get the best education you can, and the government allows you to go into tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of debt and making such an impactful decision at a young age, and then your return on investment isn't as much as expected, and then you start to really struggle and miss payments, and it really becomes a really nasty trap. So you do have to put some blame on the government for even allowing this in the first place, but there also is an accountability element, and we're in a lot of financial trouble as well, and forgiving all of these loans is it's tough for us to do, as you mentioned.
Yep. Yep. And to me, it kind of is a call to just like reorient everybody, because it's so easy, especially with people who just come out of high school and they have a dream of, they loved their Egyptian history classes in high school, and they say that, this is something I'm really going to go after in college, and I'm going to study it and do a PhD in it. But what's really hard for that 18-year-old person to understand is how much it's going to suck to have $300,000 of student loan debt that you're paying back for your entire life. I think that that's one of the reasons why we get someone like Mamdani winning the primary, because you have someone who kind of comes from a similar college educated background, who's now in the public service, and is going to come and say to people that, this is the system's fault. It's not your fault. We're going to like try and relieve all this debt for you. So it's a tough situation. I think that it kind of calls for us to really soul search about how we advise people what the American dream should look like as it relates to college, and kind of where we go from here. But obviously, super, super tough issue to figure out.
It is a tough issue, and especially in a job market for recent grads that struggles, but there might be some job openings in some farm areas and construction coming up as we kind of move into this next story.
Nice.
But yeah, basically, as everyone knows, one of Trump's main goals has been to handle this illegal immigration sort of thing that's going on right now. He's Trump has stated he vows to create a 100% American born workforce, and he's gotten to work. He's deporting tens of thousands of people. I was looking at statistics and I believe around 70% of people being deported have no sort of criminal background at all, which is pretty similar to a US born citizen, maybe a few percentage points lower, but it is, it's happening and it's kind of everywhere. And if you want to kind of bring into sort of the employment implications of ICE and what's going on there.
Right. It's obviously super clear that there are a lot of immigrants who are the backbone of our economy, particularly in some of the entry level jobs and jobs that are absolutely essential. As someone who worked in a restaurant with Hispanic speaking, undocumented folks in the kitchen, that's a place where we see a lot of these people, hospitality. This article specifically mentions people in agriculture that those workers are sorely needed and that we need people to do those jobs. And Trump is really hammering down on illegal immigration, and I think that there is certainly some merit to that of wanting some sort of process as far as national security and making sure that we're managing those risks on that end. And this I'm sure is also popular with a lot of the people voting for him because if you can remove a lot of those people, it's gonna boost wages for some of the lower class who now their labor is more scarce, so they're going to get a higher wage presumably. But as far as the country as a whole, this could be a big risk.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, from Trump's perspective, as you said, of course, wanting to really have a proper process and really being an advocate for legal immigration and things of that nature. But just terms of financials, not to put numbers on anything, but yeah, kind of some graphs that we have here. One here is just depicting lower labor supply, meaning lower job growth and higher wages, which, as you mentioned, higher wages good for, some people who are staying here, and but there is lower job growth. And I don't know if you've heard any of this from the real estate side, but I've heard some stories about real estate construction groups losing a ton of their workforce, like really crazy numbers. And when you just think about how this is going to affect projects like that in the commercial real estate sector, and of course farming, and that's going to increase wages and drive down margins. And it's going to be a very interesting sort of metric. And something else, I feel like we always go back to the deficit, but in the long run, people are projecting a lower GDP growth as a result of this. And that means also lower tax revenue. And we have a real debt crisis, and trying to pay that down with some tax revenue is it might take a hit. So that's something else to kind of take note of. I know we always go back to that, but it's everywhere.
Right. And like we really need the economy to grow to pay down that debt. And I remember one thing from this article that I saw is there's a risk of up to a 1.5% decrease in long-term GDP growth from a weaker labor supply. And we already know that the number of births in the US is going down, if you've seen any graphs on that. So put those two pieces together, and this becomes a really messy story very quickly, but it kind of does beg this other question, right? Of that, we have a lot of benefits in the US. We have welfare benefits, Medicaid benefits, a lot of which Trump is cutting as we speak. But that having immigration with a lot of those benefits is kind of interesting because those things certainly are a privilege. There are a lot of people in a lot of these countries who want to have access to those benefits, but that does that mean that, anybody can come in even if they're coming in illegally? It probably means that there does have to be a process there. But for people who have been here for 5, 10 years and are clearly part of the labor force, as these graphs are showing, that, this is going to be problematic.
Yeah, you bring up a great point. Sort of that. a lot of those things that we're sort of giving to undocumented immigrants. And there's a lot of pushback against that, especially those who come in recently. But some of the data that, at least in the New York Times article that I was reading, is just this case study on some of these farmers who have been here for 30 years already and are getting sort of tossed. So you wonder how that's going to play. But yeah, maybe there could be a bit more of a middle ground between establishing a new system and maybe ICE focusing on people with a criminal background and then moving away from the people who are sort of powering the backbone of our economy and doing the jobs that, quite frankly, a lot of US born citizens are not willing to do. A lot of them are going to college and taking out massive amounts of loans. So it's gonna a lot of things to consider, and everything's sort of intertwined, which is something interesting as well.
Yeah, agree with everything you said there. And like another good example of just how nothing's that black and white. So that I think that was really well put. And now just finishing up on tariffs. This is kind of tricky to do since a lot of these things have changed a lot even since this is from July 7th. It's July 13th, and I think that we've already had some movement on these figures, but that's okay. We'll get into it regardless. Um, I had a graph here, and maybe I'll be able to throw this up on the pod, but it's effectively a table that's showing, what the tariffs are on China, Canada, Mexico, and the rest of the world, and what that means for how much we're going to end up importing from them. And it's kind of interesting to see that, before anyone adjusts and the labor, or no, in the flows of trade stay the same, we're going to have 14% come from China, 13% from Canada, 15% from Mexico. And that's fine. And I think that what is interesting is that after flows adjust, trade flows adjust to account for the tariff, that this post-substitution number, that's going to be how things adjust. So now China's falling to 8%, Canada and Mexico coming up slightly 17, 19% respectively. And I think that why that's interesting is kind of framing what Trump is trying to do with tariffs, is trying to make our supply chain less dependent on China. And I think that is something that looks like it's happening here from this piece from Budget Lab. So I think that is kind of one positive that we can take away from tariffs, possibly from a if we're looking at it from a national security angle, and if we're looking at it as we don't trust China anymore. Though, I mean, this is obviously easier said than done from a lot of the other things that we've looked at, but I think that is one kind of interesting point that I just wanted to bring up.
Yeah, kind of becoming less dependent on China makes, I feel like it was the joke when you were growing up. You would look at anything and you'd turn it over and say made in China. And even during COVID, like your masks were made from China, like everything. So, definitely trying to become more of an independent nation. That's definitely the goal, and national security, of course, and just having the resources on hand, to be able to defend against crises. And I guess something else that I threw on was actually, let's do this other one first. So Chinese exports moving away from the US to Europe and Asia, kind of this topic that we got going on. So in December of 24, the composition of Chinese exports, 15% were going to the US. And now in May 25, it was down to 9%. So that's a 6% decrease of where their exports are going. And these exports are instead diverting to Asia and the EU. So some it's like China's finding ways to continue their exports, and they're gonna keep their economy rolling, and that'll kind of flow into the other chart that I was thinking of. But yeah, they might be okay. Maybe we're not doing as much harm to them as we might think, but they're gonna keep ripping.
Exactly. Yeah, that was kind of the flip side of the coin here, is that if we stop importing their stuff, then they'll find other people who want to buy this stuff. So It's tricky. I think the one thing that we don't have here is like how much that they net export, but we do have that in the other graph. So James, I can kick it to you for that.
Yeah, so this graph is a long run change in GDP level from 2025 tariffs to date. So up to July 7th, in the last week or so. So something that I found kind of interesting was the US is taking more of a long run GDP uh, detriment than China, which is
Now
kind
we
of
see.
against what Trump has been saying and what the whole point has been. But we're taking a harder hit than China's taking. So, and EU's actually benefiting from it. UK, Mexico's benefiting from it. So, very interesting to see that. But Canada is taking the real hit here. We have a little graph here from who's this from? The Budget Lab. And Canada is just well more uh has a way worse long run real GDP harm than the US and anyone else even on this graph. It's not even comparable. But all those jokes about Canada becoming the 51st state are looking a little more realistic, but
Yeah, maybe the US LBO of Canada is coming soon, but that's also something that's interesting to me and trying to like pair that with the other graph above of how like the project import share from Canada to the US would be coming up, but I guess that I guess that just like the net effect of how much US is going to buy after the tariff is going to go down to such an extent that this will take a severe toll on Canada. So that is interesting to see. And yeah, this is obviously not great news as far as how we're thinking about tariffs, because certainly if at all, I think it's a whole different debate if the US is less than China as far as their decline in real GDP growth, but there's certainly still a debate there because it's still bad for both of us. So why are we doing this? But the fact that the US is projected to have a worse impact on their GDP than China, that makes us really think that we should halt the brakes or put the brakes on tariffs if this data is correct.
yeah. And I mean, this is only with like a very limited number of tariffs in place. This is on like the 10% baseline and a few other automobile ones, but I don't know. Are tariffs good for anyone? I don't know. That's the big question. Maybe people argue short term, we're gonna build up our national security and kind of bring some more production back to the US, but some of this long run GDP data does not look very encouraging. But again, the market that doesn't care, stocks are still up, equities are roaring, so we'll see.
We will see. We will see. And maybe there is still an argument to be made. That's why I was trying to put that first graph up for the counterpoint of, we're trying to decrease our import share from China, so maybe there's some value in our supply chain being less reliant there. But big questions, and I think most of the data that we've seen kind of confirms the position that tariffs are going to be a net negative for the U.S. But regardless, this was a great episode of just kind of every big macroeconomic trend that exists right now. We went from tariffs to immigration to student loans, copper imports. We really hit it all today.
Yeah, great stuff. Glad to give everyone a rundown, and we'll see you on the next one.
Yeah, we'll see you episode 15. That'll be another good milestone for the fellas.
Thanks for listening.
Of course. Take care.